Hearing will come to order. This is a hearing by the Republican Conference on the idea of building 100 new nuclear power plants in 20 years. We're joined already by Senator Jim Bunning of Kentucky, Senator John McCain, Senator Kyle will be here. I believe other senators will be here during this time, and we're glad to have 4 distinguished witnesses. I'll introduce the witnesses now, and then we'll go to them in just a minute. We'll ask you to present your comments in, maybe we'll go right to left, David, starting with you, and then going to Alex, if that is all right with the 4 of you. And if each of you could take 5 or 7 minutes, something like that, with your remarks, and then that would give the senators more chance to ask questions of you and to have more interchange. We'll of course be glad to have your comments as a part of the record, and we'll circulate it to other senators and to anyone in the media and in the country who is interested in this. Our participants today include Scott Campbell, who's president of the American Council on Global Nuclear Competitiveness. He'll discuss how to renew American industry by going to smaller modular nuclear plants, among other things. Michael Kurzeja. Did I have that right, Michael?
Close enough, Senator.
Thank you, Michael. President of North America Young Generation in Nuclear. Talk about the challenge of recruiting young people to the nuclear industry. David Blee is Executive Director of the U.S. Transport Council. He'll discuss the process, what's involved if we have an aggressive goal of building 100 nuclear plants. And Alex Flint, well known to us on the Hill here because he formerly worked here as the Chief Counsel of the Energy Committee, or Staff Director for it. Senior Vice President, Nuclear Energy Institute, will help us look ahead for 20 years and see what might be possible with nuclear plants. Republican senators have adopted as a challenge the idea of building 100 new nuclear power plants during the next 20 years. We understand the importance of other forms of alternative energy and renewable energy. I went to Oak Ridge a year ago, Oak Ridge National Laboratory in our state, and suggested we have a series of mini Manhattan projects that would put America on the path to clean energy independence, and that would focus on 7 grand challenges, including plug-in electric cars and trucks, carbon capture from coal plants, making solar power cost competitive, recycling used nuclear fuel, advanced biofuels from crops we don't eat, green buildings, and finally, fusion. But today we're talking about what we do in the meantime being the next 20 years. And our proposal is that our nation commit itself to building 100 new nuclear power plants between now and 2030 while we figure out renewable energy. That would double the number of nuclear plants approximately. It would increase the share of electricity that nuclear produces in the United States to probably above 40% from the 20% today. Today, nuclear produces about 70% of the pollution-free, carbon-free electricity in the country, compared with 4% of the pollution-free, carbon-free electricity that's produced by the sun, the wind, and the earth. So if you care about climate change, if you care about reliable electricity, if you care about low-cost electricity, and you care about American energy independence, it seems to us that 100 new nuclear plants is the place to start, especially since it's a technology we invented but seem to have put aside while France, Japan, India, China, other countries in the world move ahead using our technology to produce jobs, energy, lower their carbon emissions, and lower their pollution emissions. So that's our goal. We intend to stay on this goal for as long as it takes. Our hope is that we have presidential leadership of the kind that would have the President say to the Department of Energy and say to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, give me a plan by which I can lead the country to build 100 nuclear power plants between now and 2030. What would it take to do it? What are the obstacles in the way? What would make that possible? We believe it's a realistic plan. So our goal is 100 nuclear power plants in the next 20 years while we figure out renewable energy. We're delighted to have today already two Republican senators, Senator Jim Bunning of Kentucky, a longtime member of the Energy Committee, Senator Jeff Sessions of Alabama, who's been a leading spokesman on nuclear energy. And I would ask Senator Bunning and Senator Sessions if they would each like to make a comment, and then we'll go to the witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to, first of all, welcome all of our witnesses today. As Congress debates the future of clean energy and emission-reducing technologies, we cannot leave out the role of nuclear power or nuclear energy. We are at a crossroads with the future of domestic nuclear energy. We have not had a new nuclear plant come online in 13 years, and we have not issued any new licenses in 55 years. This process is obviously broken and will remain so as long as we refuse to move with responsible storage for nuclear waste. Nuclear energy cannot have a future if we do not come up with a comprehensive plan to deal with the waste, whether it is through storing it permanently in a repository like Yucca Mountain or through reprocessing it. Congress came up with a solution for nuclear waste disposal in 2002. I was very disappointed to see the administration's budget proposal this year for Yucca Mountain, which essentially zeroed it out. The Department of Energy has a contractual obligation to take possession of nuclear waste by 1998 and has been found liable in courts by utilities for compensation for storing it. The long-delayed Yucca Mountain project has cost American taxpayers over $9 billion over the past 20 years. Zeroing out funding for it is irresponsible and costly to all of our taxpayers in the United States. We cannot afford to continue to pay to this project while the administration looks into alternative places for storage. We must have some option for storage coupled with reprocessing in order to move forward with developing our nuclear industry. If we do not, I believe the Nuclear Regulatory Commission will not license any new reactors and the industry will remain at a standstill. I'm looking forward to hearing from our witnesses today about what we as a Congress can do to help jumpstart this industry. If we are serious about any type of clean energy debate, then we cannot leave out nuclear power. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to your comments.
Senator Sessions.
Thank you, Senator Alexander and Senator Bunning, for those comments, and I really appreciate, Lamar, your leadership on this important issue. The way I see it, pretty simple to me, that American energy policy should emphasize three things. One, national security. Number two, economic vitality in our country, not sap our growth, but the kind of new technologies that can actually enhance our growth, and environmentally sound, that doesn't harm our environment and actually would help clean up our environment. I guess you can see why this is a trifecta, nuclear power, can't you? It's all American made, creates 600-700 jobs plus thousands in the construction phase, all American. Number two, it's economically preferable to other sources of energy, particularly as we can expect that coal and natural gas and other sources will go up in the future and increase in expense. And it emits no pollutants into the atmosphere and zero CO2. I mean, this is a win-win for us. And so I want to hear the panel, and we'll talk about the issues. I would just say that Senator McCain, who I hope could join us, during the campaign raised this issue. President Obama then suggested that initially he wouldn't say much about nuclear power as being an alternative. Later, as he took some flack on that issue, he said it should be considered and would be considered. But two things have happened of significance since he's been elected president. One of them is to cancel the Yucca facility flat out, and the other one is to create a 2-year study, basically create a 2-year delay on any policies that would favor nuclear power, which I think is irresponsible and contrary to the will of the American people. 59% of the people in a recent Gallup survey said they favored nuclear power, and almost half that number, 27%, strongly favored it. And that's a pretty big core, strongly favoring support too. People who've thought about it, maybe have had nuclear power plants in their neighborhoods and regions, and they're familiar with how they work and the happy people that work there and how they're supportive of it. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for having this hearing. I hope that we'll learn something about the challenges that we face, and I hope some way, somehow, we can get this country committed to building 100 new nuclear power plants. It would be fabulous for our economy, fabulous for our environment, and fabulous for our national security. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Senator Sessions. We have a climate change and energy bill heading this way from the House of Representatives, and I think most of us believe that if climate change is the inconvenient problem of the day, then nuclear power is the inconvenient answer. Mr. Blee, why don't we start with you, and if each of you could keep your remarks to about 7 minutes, why then that'll leave us time for questions. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, Senator, and thank you for chairing this important discussion, and thank you to the other senators, Senator Sessions and Bunnings, for being here today. I'm appearing here today on behalf of the U.S. Nuclear Infrastructure Council, which is a successor organization to the U.S. Transport Council as of last month. We are a nuclear think tank representing the vanguard of companies involved in the next wave of nuclear energy plants in the United States. And we are encouraged by the focus of today's hearing and its emphasis on the benefits of nuclear energy and the goal of 100 new nuclear plants in the U.S. over 20 years. Senator Alexander raised the issue of how would we get 100 plants in the next 20 years. Well, the fact of the matter is we can look to the past and to the present. We have done this before in the United States. We built 100 plants in 15 to 20 years previously. And right now in the world there are 429 plants in development or on the drawing board, which would bring the number of plants in the world to 803 total, doubling the amount of plants which are currently at 374. So I think that's instructive. The rest of the world is planning, with a little assistance from us currently in that count, to double the amount of capacity in the world. A few years ago, there was much buzz about the dawn of the nuclear energy renaissance in the United States. And the good news, as I just pointed out there is a renaissance, and that's internationally, with an estimated 44 plants under construction, and as I mentioned, another 350 or more on the drawing boards. But while there are reasons for guarded optimism here at home, only one nuclear energy plant is actually under construction in the United States, TVA's Watts Bar Unit 2. The United States is clearly at a crossroads. The question is, do we want to help lead the global nuclear energy renaissance with enormously favorable benefits for homegrown, clean energy, jobs, manufacturing, and technology development, as well as national security, or do we want to follow? There has been much talk in this Congress about global climate concerns and clean energy, a clean energy economy, economic stimulus, job creation, and reviving American manufacturing. But while nuclear energy is the most potent, clean energy baseload power option, the most powerful stimulator of jobs per megawatt, and enjoys record performance, reliability, safety, economics, and strong public support, Nuclear energy was excised from the stimulus package, and there is no nuclear title in the sweeping clean energy bill recently passed by the House Energy and Commerce Committee. Consequently, we are encouraged to see the clarity of vision and the boldness of purpose in your hearing statement today. We believe there are 5 essential components for any comprehensive approach to a blueprint, or some people call a Manhattan Project, or what I call an Apollo program for new nuclear, to dramatically expand U.S. reliance on nuclear energy and American leadership in this arena. These elements generally parallel thinking along these lines by the Making the Renaissance a Reality Roundtable series sponsored by Senators Voinovich and Carper, which we have been honored to participate in. The first of these is new build focus. We need a laser focus on the looming first wave of new U.S. nuclear energy plants. With applications for combined construction and operating licenses for 26 reactors submitted to the U.S. NRC, it is critical that we do everything possible to get as many of this wave of initial plants out of the red zone and into the end zone. One obvious key to this is to consummate the $18.5 billion loan guarantee, which was part of the Energy Policy Act of 2005. That matter, of course, is still pending at the U.S. Department of Energy. However, it appears we need to go further to mitigate what the MIT Energy Initiative calls the risk premium inherent in high upfront capital cost. To this end, we would support expanding the loan guarantee volume to at least cover the top 4 projects currently under review by the DOE at an estimated $38 billion in loan volume. Concepts for deployment of a clean energy bank with an additional funding of $100 billion for clean energy technology development should also be pursued. And additional consideration should also be given to the, and I think there's been some discussion in this Congress obviously today, the inclusion of nuclear energy in any reasonable portfolio standard or renewable electricity standard. The MIT initiative recently issued an update of its Future of Nuclear Power study in which it noted, unfortunately, most RPS programs exclude 2 important low-carbon technologies, nuclear and coal with CO2 sequestration, confusing the objective of reducing carbon emission with encouraging renewable energy and electricity generation. The second area is regulatory stability. The work of the U.S. NRC is obviously pivotal to the future of new nuclear generation in the United States. It is vital that they have the resources to carry out their responsibility, and they certainly are always coping with resource issues, both on the budgetary and of the workforce nature. They are trying to recruit hundreds of people there in the face of, in competition with the private sector. They've done an excellent job, however, to that end, and they need to be supported. Under the chairmanship of Dale Klein, the NRC has done a Herculean job of preparing the nuclear renaissance. We're hopeful that the new chairman, Greg Jasko, will seek to build positively on this foundation. It is also imperative, with the balance of the NRC up in the air, given the pending appointment of 2 new commissioners, that any new nominees be scrutinized thoroughly for readiness for these positions and their approach to the pressing demand for deployment of new plants. Third, with the third issue is building the industry base. With a third of the workforce approaching retirement and 50% fewer nuclear energy programs, this is obviously a significant challenge. Suffice to say, there are many ingredients that can go into this, such as a reorientation of the DOE's Office of Nuclear Energy and its priorities, a combination of worker training and clean energy technology. We don't buy the thesis that build the field and they will come. We believe this area needs a lot of support and incentivization, and we look forward to developing more of those as we go through this year. Fourth area is sustainable fuel cycle. A significant nuclear energy expansion requires a sustainable fuel cycle. The vital elements are the restructuring. We support the Voinovich-Alexander legislation introduced in the past Congress to establish a U.S. Fuel Management Corporation along with access to the Nuclear Waste Fund. We favor the deployment of available technology to close the fuel cycle. We support long-term R&D. We support central interim storage of spent fuel, and we also believe it's essential that licensing of the proposed Yucca Mountain repository, which the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Institute for 21st Century Energy has called the safest and best option for disposing of the country's used nuclear fuel and nuclear waste given the parameters of U.S. law, be completed. Under any spent fuel management scenario, a nuclear waste repository will be required. final area is, given concern about safeguards and security of nuclear materials internationally, it is increasingly evident that our non-proliferation programs can't be business as usual. We need a Nunn-Lugar style ramping up of common sense non-proliferation programs such as the Global Threat Reduction Initiative and the Reduced Enrichment for Research and Test Reactors, among others. In closing, we applaud the focus of this hearing and we appreciate the opportunity to offer our perspective. We look forward to working with you as you move forward to build consensus, focus, and dialogue on this critical issue.
Thank you, Mr. Blee. Mr. Campbell, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this opportunity to address the Republican Conference, and thank you, Senator Bunning and Senator Sessions, for your support of this important initiative. The question you asked today, 100 new nuclear plants in 20 years, why we should do it, is a crucial one for all Americans, and to continuing and improving our way of life, to mitigating the risk of global warming while growing our economy, to creating and keeping high-tech jobs, to maintaining our competitiveness, and to combating the perils of nuclear proliferation. I'm speaking today on behalf of the American Council on Global Nuclear Competitiveness. The Council was founded in 2006 as a nonprofit educational organization dedicated to getting the facts out about nuclear energy and what it means for America. The bipartisan council is chaired by Senator Howard Baker, Senator Bennett Johnston, and Ambassador Paul Robinson. Our members come from government, industry, research laboratories, and academia, all citizens interested in seeing an American nuclear renaissance become a reality. Now, if we look around the world today, we see that nuclear energy, which the United States pioneered, developed, and shared with the world, is undergoing a nuclear renaissance in Asia, Europe, Africa, Canada, South America. But sadly, only the United States may fail to join this movement, and therefore is in danger of, we are in danger of losing ground on many fronts. We have not ordered a new nuclear plant in 30 years. The companies that developed our reactors and serviced them have largely moved offshore. Skilled nuclear workers in the metal trades and manufacturing have migrated to other employment. In other words, we are in danger of losing a core energy industry. Senator Johnston often reminds us that we have lost hundreds of thousands of jobs in the nuclear energy sector over the last 30 years, and we are running out of time to recapture them. So with these stark realities in mind, the Council sought to objectively determine what is at stake in an American nuclear renaissance. What do we stand to lose if we abandon the revolutionary energy source we discovered and brought to the world? And on the other hand, what do we stand to gain at home and abroad if we reclaim global leadership in nuclear energy? To answer these questions, the Council conducted a number of investigations. Most recently, Chairman, we looked at the two principal concerns, the economy and the environment. And we sought to determine what impacts an American nuclear renaissance would have on economic growth, on job creation, and CO2 reduction. And we commissioned Oxford Economics, which had evaluated the British nuclear industry for their government, to take a close look at our situation. They had no dog in this fight, and they provided an objective third-party analysis of the impacts of a nuclear revival and what they would have on economic growth, job creation, and the environment. Oxford Economics conducted a study in a couple of stages. They did a macro first and then a state-by-state analysis, which is quite interesting. They completed the investigation before the Great Recession arrived, and the impressive findings are all the more dramatic now against the backdrop of historically high unemployment and recession. Oxford looked at what the electric power industry is planning to do. They evaluated a scenario which is about half the size of what we've postulated today, the 100-reactor scenario, but it's instructive of what we could accomplish if we did this, if we achieved these goals. The Oxford study assumed the construction of 52 new nuclear plants built by 2030. That was based upon plants that were planned and those that need to be replaced over that period of time, 4 new enrichment plants and 1 large recycle plant. And to get started, Oxford asked, what happens if we build no plants? In that case, nuclear capacity, which produces 20% of our electric power today, will drop to nearly zero by 2050. And those who think renewables will take up the slack should think twice. I would say, even if we double the contribution of renewables, primarily wind and some solar, you would produce less than maybe 5% of demand. But what happens if the U.S. builds 52 plants and 5 support facilities over the next 20 years? Well, it's pretty instructive. 350,000 jobs, with 45,000 of them being high-tech, high-value-added manufacturing jobs. Value-added benefits, which reverberate throughout the economy from the supply chain and spending by wage earners, would reach $45 billion. Carbon savings, CO2 reductions, would reach 450 million tons CO2. And there would be import savings beyond that, from importing less foreign oil and gas, particularly natural gas, $49 billion. Now, in terms of the question posed today, if the U.S. were to build 100 new reactors in 20 years, job creation and CO2 reductions would likely double, approaching 700,000 jobs and taking 900 million tons of CO2 out of the atmosphere. Our takeaway from this study is that the nuclear build-out will produce real jobs in the near and medium term, a point that I think the Chairman has made, and will create long-term, high-quality work for many American workers beginning now and lasting well into the future. The Council believes that we must be realistic about job creation. This happened before, as David pointed out. This can happen again. We can reclaim many of the jobs that were lost. We all have high hopes for the green tech revolution, but it remains to be seen when and how many jobs it can really deliver. We know from American history what nuclear reactor manufacturing and plant construction can do for the economy and for job creation. We can only guess what the much-touted green tech revolution will do for men and women who need work now and for skilled workers who are leaving the nuclear energy industry as I speak. It should be no surprise that the AFL-CIO is one of the most prominent supporters of an American nuclear renaissance. And finally, Mr. Chairman, just a point on nonproliferation. The Council examined earlier how the loss of U.S. leadership in the nuclear industry affects our ability to lead global nonproliferation efforts in the future. And this is sobering. We consulted experts in the field who work with the national laboratories at Sandia and Los Alamos, and our conclusion in short was this: the U.S. discovered nuclear energy, shared its peaceful use with the world through Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace program. We were the dominant supplier of reactors, had a monopoly on nuclear fuels for many years. As such, American nuclear companies were the innovators, the suppliers, and active partners in nuclear technology worldwide. In so doing, we were able to create and lead the international nonproliferation regime based upon the NPT. The regime, of course, operated well for decades, as we know, but is under pressure now, was shaken by the Aki Khan scandal, and then now being challenged by the Iranian nuclear program. But the bottom line is, for the United States to continue to lead effectively on the nonproliferation front, it must be at the table. And to be at the nonproliferation table, the U.S. must be actively engaged in the nuclear energy industry, something that is not happening. Our withdrawal from nuclear manufacturing, our failure to build new reactors, our retreat from industrial leadership all this means that increasingly we're not at the table, and those at the table will make the rules. And we could have some very different rules in the future. Historically, the U.S. and the world suffer when the United States fails to lead, and nonproliferation will be no exception. Thank you very much. If we abandon our nuclear capabilities, Mr. Chairman, and lose our position at the nonproliferation table, we erode our industrial base, we lose our technological edge in advanced nuclear systems, we lose a skilled workforce, and we weaken our country abroad. If we launch the American nuclear renaissance along the lines that this committee is recommending, we can preserve a vital industry, create thousands of new jobs, combat global warming, and continue to lead global efforts to manage proliferation risks. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Mr. Campbell. Michael, now I want to get this. Kurzeja?
That's correct, Senator.
Good. Michael Kurzeja, welcome. Thank you for coming.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Senator Bunning, and Senator Sessions. I want to thank you here for inviting me to talk to you about nuclear energy. My name is Michael Kurzeja, and I'm a maintenance supervisor at Exelon, the largest operator of nuclear energy plants in the country. Here today, though, however, I'm speaking to you as my capacity as the president of the North American Young Generation in Nuclear. Formed in 1999 by 7 individuals from the United States, Canada, and Mexico, North American Young Generation in Nuclear has grown to more than 5,000 members today. We have 70 chapters in North America at commercial power plants, research facilities, and other locations. NAYGN membership base represents individuals who are 35 years or younger and are in fields of nuclear science and technology. Our members are engineers, chemists, plant operators, health physicists, scientists, mechanics, electricians, accountants, environmentalists, and more. Our mission is to unite young professionals who believe that nuclear science and technology is a vital part of meeting the future energy demand across the globe. Our members are working together throughout North America to share our passion for this industry. Now, we have 5 strategic focuses. One is professional development of our members, providing information to the public about nuclear science and technology, aiding with recruiting and retention, focusing on knowledge transfer, and providing networking opportunities to our members. Now, NAYGN has no shortage of energy. In 2008, our members conducted over 45,000 hours of professional development and public information activities throughout North America. Our members like to share their enthusiasm in nuclear energy in many different venues. One of those venues includes conducting a 5th grade poster contest. In 2008, this activity had our members reaching 175 classrooms in 40 schools, and we collected over 3,500 posters. Our members also see the importance of showing our enthusiasm to key decision makers. Last month, nearly 250 NAYGN members participated in a Capitol Hill Day. We visited legislators and staff from 27 different states, held more than 100 scheduled meetings, and participated in 120 impromptu visits. I'm proud to say that NAYGM was the largest delegation ever to talk about nuclear energy issues on Capitol Hill. The energy our organization has is contagious. In 2008 alone, our organization grew by 38%. This growth is just one of the indicators that the nuclear renaissance is upon us. Our young professionals believe that nuclear energy will help our nation meet its electricity demand by providing clean energy, high-paying jobs for hundreds of thousands of workers, and reliable baseload electricity. Nuclear energy, as you know, is the world's largest source of emission-free energy. In this country, it accounts for 74% of the emissions-free generation. And nuclear energy does not burn anything to generate electricity, so it does not produce any greenhouse gases. This means that nuclear energy has a minimal impact on global climate change. And on this basis, we believe that nuclear generation, along with other low-carbon technologies and energy efficiency, will be an important part of our future energy mix. In 2008, the Clean and Safe Energy Coalition study found that as this country moves forward in the nuclear renaissance, as Chairman Alexander, you proposed, it would translate into tens of thousands of jobs created to build, maintain, and support new reactors. As many as 2,400 workers will be needed at a single site during peak periods of construction. Once new plants are built, 400 to 700 people will be needed to run each plant, depending on design, number of reactors, and staffing strategy. U.S. companies have submitted 17 applications to potentially build 26 reactors. These potential new builds have already created as many as 15,000 to 21,000 new jobs. Jobs at nuclear energy facilities pay substantially more than average salaries in areas where the plants exist. Median salaries range from between $60,000 to $90,000 per year, from jobs ranging from technicians and engineers to operators and welders. We're talking about jobs where people buy houses, jobs where they send their children to college with, jobs that by their nature cannot be shipped overseas and communities are built around. Even as this country experiences an unprecedented set of economic challenges, the nuclear industry remains one of the few that is hiring today. At a time when the nuclear industry is experiencing growth in new plant builds, nearly a third of all its workers are retirement eligible within 5 years. This has led to a multitude of exciting, rewarding, and diverse job opportunities for young professionals. Today's young professionals are excited to be part of an industry that will support long-term career opportunities. Our nation is looking for ways to put people back to work, and the nuclear industry is looking for the human capital to not only sustain its current fleet, but also build new plants. New nuclear plants are a great investment for this country because they will put our factories and skilled craftsmen back to work. Young people entering the job market will have the opportunity for high-paying and rewarding careers. And we will do this in a way that reduces our nation's carbon footprint while working towards energy independence. The U.S. DOE forecasts that we will need 21% more electricity by 2030. And currently our nation is looking on how to meet this demand while being as environmentally friendly as possible. NAYGN supports this effort and believes that all low-carbon generation options should be evaluated. And with over a 90% capacity factor, nuclear energy is the most reliable form of electricity produced in the United States. As you consider the future of nuclear energy, I hope you will recognize the important role that nuclear energy plays in providing safe, clean, and reliable electricity to our country. We need to continue investing in our energy infrastructure, and NAYGN believes that nuclear energy should be the top energy priority for this country. Nuclear energy is vital to this country's environmental responsibility, energy independence, and economic prosperity. The members of the North American Young Generation in Nuclear stand ready to make the nuclear renaissance a reality. And gentlemen, we need you to help create the legislative environment so it can happen.
Thank you, Mr. Kurzeja. Now, before I recognize Alex Flint, we've been joined by Senator John McCain, who made nuclear power a primary flank in his presidential campaign and a primary part of his energy and climate change legislation. Senator McCain, would you like to make some comments at this time?
After I change seats. Well, first of all, Mr. Chairman, I want to apologize for being late. I was on the floor on the drug reimportation issue, which I think is also an important issue for all of our citizens, particularly senior citizens. I want to thank the witnesses, and I won't make a long statement because our witnesses make the case that we have to increase the nation's supply of clean, cheap electricity that will really reduce carbon emissions and make future electricity use in the nation's transportation sector cleaner and more affordable, and reducing our dependence on foreign oil. Price of oil is going back up, we know, as the economy recovers. Recently, I was on a trip to Japan and visited a reprocessing facility. That stands in sharp contrast to a question when I asked Secretary Chu about the administration's position in regard to reprocessing of spent nuclear fuel, and the Secretary responded that he believed that reprocessing needed, quote, further study. I wonder how the Japanese and the French and the British feel about that needs, quote, further study. By the way, he also said that there would be no storage at Yucca Mountain. So the administration is now taking a position where they would, quote, consider nuclear power, yet at the same time we can't recycle spent nuclear fuel, and we can't store nuclear waste at a place where we spent, I believe, 16 years, and one of the witnesses knows how many billions of dollars of ratepayers' money, and so yet we would, quote, consider nuclear power. Mr. Chairman, it's well known. The witnesses can describe far better than I can and more eloquently. Without nuclear power, we do not reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I say to all environmentalists, 5% of our renewable energy can be obtained by solar power, about 15% at best by wind power. And so here we are with a situation where we're all in favor of alternative energy and will be more in favor when the price of oil goes up, and yet the administration is basically giving it nothing better than lip service. To witness, Mr. Chairman, the bill that is going through the committee, the Energy Committee, which now calls for a, quote, commission. Commission. That's the nuclear portion of the energy bill that's going through the Senate of the United States, the Energy Committee of the Senate. And by the way, one statistic, in order to replace the power generated by the Palo Verde nuclear power plant in my home state of Arizona, we would need to construct 125 miles of solar panels or over 530 square miles of wind generators. That would be to replace the electricity that Palo Verde nuclear power plant produces. And Mr. Chairman, I hope we get into it, like to end with this, I hope we get into it a little bit with the witnesses about the water requirements of solar. That's one of the kind of untold stories here about how we can generate power using solar, when in the West we all know that water is the scarcest of all commodities. So I look forward to hearing from the witnesses. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you for your advocacy and that of the Senator from Kentucky, as well as the Senator from Alabama's advocacy for nuclear power. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator McCain. And just to complete your statement, the wind and solar panels would entirely replace the nuclear power. They would only do it when the sun shone and the wind blue. But what we'll do, Alex Flint will testify, and then let me suggest this for the senators. Why don't we do one question each, starting with Senator McCain, then go to Senator Bunning, Senator Sessions. I'll take the fourth, then we'll go back around, each with one question until about 3:30. Mr. Flint, thank you for coming.
Mr. Chairman, Senators, thank you. It's an honor to be here today. I think there is no doubt that the construction and operation of 100 new nuclear reactors would significantly advance U.S. energy security. It would advance our environment objectives, and it would
Is your mic on, Alex? Thank you.
Is it? And would provide thousands of new jobs. I want to share with you today the perspective from some of the utility companies that are contemplating ordering new reactors. They make their decisions based upon their perceptions of markets and the regulatory environment. And as they look out into the future, there is no certain milepost that they can look to for guidance, but there is increasing information that provides them some guidance. So, for example, the Energy Information Administration today forecasts a 21% increase in electricity demand by 2030. While it is impossible to forecast if, when, or how carbon may be regulated, the proposed House legislation includes a 42% greenhouse gas reduction target for 2030. When the Electric Power Research Institute analyzes very similar mileposts, it concludes that we will need to construct 40 to 55 new nuclear power plants by 2030. This is just a forecast, and it is based upon assumptions, and the assumptions matter, and they are subject to change. So, for example, EPRI's analysis assumes that energy efficiency and conservation programs will be deployed faster than the Energy Information Administration assumes those programs will be deployed. So if EIA is correct, electricity demand will be higher, and we'll need to build more nuclear power plants by 2030. But assuming the EIA and EPRI models as a base, the U.S. will need to build 45 reactors by 2030. The biggest challenge in that regard will be financing those projects, each of which is forecast to cost $6, $8, or more billion. In general, U.S. utilities today are not large enough to finance construction projects of that type based on traditional financing schemes, a 50-50 debt-to-equity structure. There are steps that can be taken to address that challenge. A number of projects that are regulated by public utility commissions will be financed using construction work in progress, in which a company is permitted to recover part of the cost before the plant goes online, a concept equivalent to making a larger down payment when you buy a house. Such an approach is estimated to result in a long-term savings to the consumer of 25% by reducing interest costs. The DOE Loan Guarantee Program could have a similar beneficial impact by also reducing interest costs on new plants and thereby reducing long-term costs to consumers. It is for that reason that NEI strongly supports reforms of the DOE's Title 17 Loan Guarantee Program and proposals such as the authorization of a Clean Energy Deployment Administration. But as has been said by previous witnesses, that program currently does not have enough loan volume to fund even the early movers of the new nuclear power plants. That program currently has a loan volume limitation of $18.5 billion. We estimate that the first 4 to 6 plants that will come online in the 2016 to 2017 timeframe will need loan volume in the range of $38.5 to $40 billion. They'll need to have that loan volume by approximately 2012 when they will receive their licenses from the NRC and move into the construction phase. There are many benefits to building those nuclear power plants, just a few. We estimate that 45 new nuclear plants will employ 82,800 construction workers at a peak of 128,800 workers, 32,000 permanent jobs, $20 million in annual state and local taxes at each one of those plants. We've even estimated that combined, those 45 new nuclear power plants will generate federal revenues of $3.3 billion every year. The infrastructure required to support those plants is really astonishing. 65,000 nuclear-grade valves, 8,000 pumps, 11,000 miles of cabling. The list goes on. 18 million cubic yards of concrete. We're talking not just about building nuclear power plants. We're talking about building an industrial infrastructure capable of supporting it. Mr. Chairman, I know that you and others have called for the construction of 100 nuclear power plants by 2030, which currently exceeds this scenario that I've gone through. But there are scenarios by which 100 nuclear power plants are necessary and possible. For example, EPA models of some climate legislation indicate that to achieve an 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, nuclear energy will need to provide 1.9 trillion kilowatt hours of generation per year. For reference, that's 2.4 times as much electricity each year as is generated by today's 104 plants. And if you do the math, that means that by the year 2050, we will need 245 reactors of today's average size. Now, keep in mind that in the 2030s, a number of our existing plants will reach the end of their 60-year operating life and will begin decommissioning, although it is possible that some would receive license extensions for an additional 20 years. We have analyzed this in similar scenarios, and it is possible that 100 additional new nuclear plants could be in operation, under construction, or in the licensing process in 2030. This would require starting the licensing and eventually the construction of 5 to 7 new nuclear power plants a year, starting in 2012. That construction rate was achieved in the 1970s, but would require additional action to address the same issues I listed previously when discussing the 45-plant scenario. But it also brings up an additional topic relating to the licensing process. Under the existing new licensing process, the initial licensing is taking at least 6 years, 2 years to prepare the application and 4 years for the NRC to review it. We believe this process can be reduced to 3 years, a 1-year preparation and a 2-year NRC review process. To achieve this scale of improvement will require a close look at the subsidiary licensing processes, such as the environmental review. For example, if a utility receives an early site permit, which requires an environmental impact statement, and then immediately submits an application for a combined operating license to build a reactor on that site, it should not require an additional 28 months to do an almost identical environmental impact statement in that second step. Mr. Chairman, let me close with a brief discussion of something Senator Bunning and Senator McCain spoke to in detail, the current situation regarding used fuel. First, all credible scientific evidence to date suggests that Yucca Mountain is suitable to serve as a geologic repository for spent fuel. But it is clear that due to political commitments the President made during the campaign, the administration may not support opening the Yucca Mountain repository even if it receives a license from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Given that the Nuclear Waste Policy Act remains the law of the land, and recognizing the legal and moral obligation that the government has to fulfill its responsibility under that law, the industry believes the NRC's review of the Yucca Mountain license application should continue. In parallel, the administration should convene an independent panel of the best scientific, environmental, engineering, and public policy leaders to fully investigate the critical issues and make a recommendation to the President and Congress on how best to proceed with managing used nuclear fuel. Given the clear need for expansion of nuclear energy programs in the United States and worldwide, the nuclear industry proposed 2 years ago that our nation should revisit the decision to use a once-through fuel cycle and instead pursue a closed fuel cycle that includes recycling. This integrated approach includes at-reactor storage, private sector or government-owned and centralized storage, research and development on recycling technology, and continued development and licensing of a federal repository. If the administration unilaterally decides to abandon the Yucca Mountain project without enacting new legislation to modify or replace the existing law, it should expect a new wave of lawsuits seeking further damage payments, as well as likely requests for refunding of at least $22 billion already collected from consumers that has not been spent on the program from the Nuclear Waste Fund. Further, given the uncertain path forward for the Yucca Mountain project and the difficult economic times facing American families and businesses, Secretary Chu should reduce the fee paid by consumers to cover only licensing costs incurred by DOE, NRC, and local Nevada government units that provide oversight of the program. Let me provide some additional clarity on that point. Every year, our ratepayers send $800 million to the federal government. The President's current budget request proposes to spend less than $100 million on licensing of Yucca Mountain. That's a $700 million charge our ratepayers should not be paying until the administration decides how it wants to proceed with the used fuel program. With that, I conclude my prepared remarks and available for questions.
Well, thanks, Mr. Flint, and thanks to each of the four of you. That's very helpful. We'll circulate your statements, and it'll help form the basis for what will be a series of hearings and conferences, roundtables, and meetings as Republican senators, hopefully with a number of Democratic senators who also agree with us about the importance of nuclear power, began to push it to the front. We've been joined by the Vice Chairman of the Republican Conference, Senator Thune. I'll ask him if he has a statement to make, then we'll go to Senator McCain for a question, then Bunning, then Sessions, and then I'll have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for holding this hearing, and I want to thank our panelists for their perspectives and their testimony. My view, Mr. Chairman, there is just simply no way that we can address the issue of climate change without a robust nuclear energy policy. And we're getting whipped by the Europeans on this, which is somewhat ironic. But today we've got nuclear power that makes up about 20% of our nation's power supply, but it's 73% of our carbon-free energy production. It's clean, it's affordable, it's reliable, and it seems to me that we're really missing the point when we talk about energy policy without including nuclear energy in that mix. And I want to point out something that the MIT study on the future of nuclear power said, and I quote, "The position is that the prospect of global climate change from greenhouse gas emissions and the adverse consequences that flow from these emissions is the principal justification for government support of the nuclear energy option," end quote. Now, the EPA analysis of the Waxman-Markey climate change bill assumes 150% increase in nuclear power generation, which would assume 200 new nuclear reactors by the year 2050. And yet the House climate change bill fails to include a nuclear power title and does not address the major issues that are facing the industry. And so I know that the panelists have already talked about the need to construct new power plants and the fact that we haven't had any in the last 30 years, but it is absolutely, it's insane to me that we haven't made more headway on this issue. And I hope that this year will be the year when we come to the realization around here in Washington among our policymakers that we've got to have a comprehensive energy policy that includes a robust nuclear energy policy if we're going to get serious, one, about meeting the energy demands that we have in the future, and two, decreasing greenhouse gas emissions. So I thank our panelists, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward to joining in the questions.
Senator McCain.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the witnesses said that we could reduce the licensing period to 3 years. Mr. Campbell, how long is it in France or Japan to obtain a license for operating a nuclear power plant?
The French, of course, have did it right.
Pull the mic up a little closer to you. It would help.
Right the first time by having one program, one plan, one design, and so it's much faster. But Alex might know what the time is, but it's much less than what we face here. And,
so,
7 years is not necessarily done 7 years either. It often takes longer.
Shouldn't we work for a common design in order to assure people that the shortening of the licensing process has all the necessary safeguards?
Well, we have made progress on that, haven't we, Alex?
Senator, in the United States, because we don't have a single purchaser, as there is in France with Electricité de France making those decisions, the market makes a decision, and so it's up to individual companies to decide if they want to buy Westinghouse reactors or GE reactors. What we are doing, though, is we are working to ensure that within each design, the designs are identical. So if you buy a Westinghouse AP1000 reactor, that design will be identical at each site. It allows for tremendous efficiencies in the licensing, but also in the operations of those plants, and will be significantly different than the way reactors evolved both during design and construction when we built the first generation of reactors.
And
Mr. Blee.
Senator, I would add, you have a good example at Palo Verde. They're all the same out there. If you go up to Northeast Energy, they have one of each. There was risk mitigation, they thought, in those days of having 3 different technologies. In Japan, they'll build 8 at a site. And one of the real big advantages we have in siting new plants is they're going to go at existing plant sites by and large. And that's a big advantage. And there's no reason, in addition to more standardized designs, that we could have more units at existing sites where feasible.
Isn't it true that there are nuclear power plants in America that the capacity for storage is quickly being exhausted?
Senator, there are power plants where the spent fuel pools are full after re-racking, and as a result, we're building dry cask storage. There are not currently plants where the ability to build additional on-site storage seems to be in jeopardy. The NRC licensing process, while that was questioned at one point, seems to be routine and fairly predictable for building on-site storage at this point.
From a national security standpoint, I don't see that. How many nuclear power plants do we have?
104 civilian plants.
Plants, that it's good to have those spent fuel rods sitting around in pools around the country.
Senator, without a doubt, it would be ideal to create centralized storage and then eventually move to recycling and deep geologic disposal. The issue for us is existing storage in pools or in dry casks safe? We believe it certainly is. The NRC has concurred in that opinion. Those facilities are tremendously robust. The images of them, the tests that they undergo are truly impressive, and at least the NRC concurs that used fuel can be stored on site safely and securely for decades.
Well, I respectfully disagree, particularly where in the Northeast, where we have very heavily populated areas. It may be true at Palo Verde, but I don't think it is in other places. Mr. Blee, you have a comment on that, and what should be done with the, was it $22 billion, whatever it is, we've collected from the ratepayers for Yucca?
Right. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that the perspective you just heard was from an operating utility perspective. There are almost a dozen shutdown plants in which they are sitting there up in Maine, New England, Connecticut, California, and they have nowhere to go. They're just simply, there's no pool there, the buildings are torn down, and there's a pad there. So if you can imagine those for another 100 years, I don't think that's an acceptable alternative. But what we're starting to see, sure, at-reactor storage is safe, but the fact of the matter is we can start with central storage, preferably at the repository, to jumpstart that. The second thing we can do is to certainly move forward to create a government corporation, Senator McCain, to manage this process and take that $22 billion, as you said, move ahead with the licensing of a repository, work to develop the recycle, and move forward with to solve the problems of the back end.
Could I just ask one more question, Mr. Chairman? If we wanted to restart, I guess, was the best word I can find, the facility in South Carolina, how long would it take us to get it into operation for recycling?
You're talking about the Barnwell facility?
The Savannah
River?
Yeah.
I think that's, last time I visited, that was pretty much shut down. I mean, to start it up, well, you have the land, obviously. I've seen the buildings. I don't know what the estimate of time. I mean, it would be probably $10 to $15 billion, and certainly a period of time for the licensing. One thing we don't have is we don't have licensing developed for siting a recycling facility, and that's something that's going to take a couple years to develop. You get in the licensing queue similar to siting a nuclear power plant. I would say you're probably in that same neighborhood in terms of a lead period there of 10 to 12 years.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the witness.
Thanks, Senator McCain. Senator Bunning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a question for Mr. Flint, Mr. Campbell. Last week, an interview with BBC News, President Obama suggested that Iran may have the right to nuclear energy. I want to know how this administration can advocate allowing Iran to have nuclear power, yet refuses to allow the development of our domestic nuclear industry. What type of message do you think this sends to our nuclear industry and to the international community? Can't throw it any higher. It's just a softball.
Senator, that's not a softball. But in addition, I have to caveat by saying, of course, I can't speak for the administration, but let me share a perspective on that issue, if you will. We currently watch the world's growing demand for electricity. While the OECD forecast is to grow for 30% electricity demand by 2050, the non-OECD countries expect a greater than 50% increase in electricity demand, driven largely by population. 6 billion people on Earth today, 9 billion people by 2050, with higher birth rates in the non-OECD countries. And so we recognize there's an insatiable demand for electricity, and there's an understandable interest in building nuclear power plants. There is a great deal of attention right now on how controls should be implemented for the deployment overseas of nuclear technology. Scott made the point that it is incredibly important that the United States be at the table and be participating in those discussions as these new international regimes are put together, because in all likelihood there does need to be new attention put to this matter. So with the situation with Iran really is something I can't comment on, particularly the way you phrased the question for the administration's perspective. But I can tell you there are situations in which new countries can successfully commit to institutional controls and technological controls to ensure that they can peacefully deploy nuclear energy. We see that with United Arab Emirates, for example, which has agreed to very strict controls on the use of nuclear technology and has done so in a way that we think can ensure that it's not a proliferation threat. So it's a case-by-case basis, and the administration will have to speak for itself on the Iran situation, sir.
Senator, I might add that I think the fact he could say that suggests that he's investing a tremendous amount of faith, if not wish fulfillment, in the green tech revolution, that believes that somehow wind and solar can solve our problems as long as a smart grid. That just isn't going to happen anytime soon. And I think it indicates he really needs to grapple with this issue that's being brought up by this committee, is what is at stake in an American nuclear renaissance. I think he doesn't understand that, and he needs to be educated, and that's why I congratulate this committee for pushing forward on that.
Well, the message that the administration seems to be sending with the zeroing out of yucca and the requirement that we have a place to store before we can jumpstart our own industry is real conflicting. It sends two different messages, obviously. And how can we jumpstart our own nuclear power energy business if we don't have a storage facility and we have a law that requires a storage facility? I mean, we can continue to do what we're doing, obviously, and that's on-site storage. I have a son that works for his company, Exelon, in Clinton, Illinois, and they are storing on-site. But they have to shut down every year to recycle and to start up again. They shut down for about 30 days every year. Now, with new technologies, this plant was built a while back. With new technologies, we don't or shouldn't have to have an 8-year waiting period before we license or permit a plant to be built, and it surely shouldn't take 10 years to put it online. So would you like to comment, Michael, about that?
Sure, Senator. You know, irrespective, obviously, we are getting some mixed signals, and what I can.
Excuse me, if I ask, if you'll pull the mic up close to you, we can hear you better. Thank you very much.
What I can share with you is the perspective that some of members of my organization shared with me recently, is that many of them are looking at opportunities abroad because of they're not sure which way we're going to fall in this country.
But if we fall one way, we're going to fall away from the table and have a voice in how it is developed and the safety of which. If we don't get in the business and produce the amount of nuclear power plants that to be competitive and clean up our air, then we're not going to be a player. And so what you're saying is that your company is looking for other areas to go to develop safe nuclear energy through different power plants. United Airman, UAE,
Right.
being one specific place.
Just a point of clarification, not my company, not Exelon, which you're
No,
with, but-
I don't mean you specifically,
Right.
but others.
Yes. Your Westinghouses, your Arevas, they're looking to expand. They have designs which many countries are favorable of. I know they're pouring concrete in China for AP1000 right now. And this, as you said, this is homegrown technology. This is our technology. And from a jobs perspective, that knowledge could be lost.
What I'm trying to get out of you is how do we get this message out to the American people and to our own colleagues in the Congress that if we don't do this, we're going to lose our seat at the table?
Well, Senator, if I could address that, I think it starts today with the vision and leadership that you're providing. I think we need to do a much better job of communicating our message. I think we need to be marshaling the grassroots as represented by Michael here. And we have to be more vigorous in our message and approach, because clearly what you have here right now should be the perfect storm for revival of nuclear energy, with the talk about the clean energy economy, jobs, stimulus, clean energy, and we're being left at the altar. And the fact of the matter is that if we do not move forward aggressively, that those jobs, that those 400 new power plants around the world, we're not going to be part of that. And when it's a ripple effect, it's hard to it weakens the non-proliferation regime when the U.S. They look at us and say they aren't recycling. They're canceling the repository. They don't have a way of storing. No agreement on centralized storage. They're only moving forward with a handful of reactors. That means that when we want a seat at the table, our position is greatly weakened.
Thank you very much.
Senator Sessions.
Thank you very much. Well, what we know is, Mr. Campbell, do we not, that the House global warming bill or global tax bill or whatever you want to call it does not have nuclear power in it. And the energy bill, as Senator McCain just said, that's moving out of our committee here in the Senate, doesn't have anything but a 2-year study. Wouldn't you say that would be troubling if that turned out to be the final policy of the United States as we discuss global climate change and our energy crisis?
Well, not only troubling, but it just won't work. If we want to reduce CO2 emissions, we can't do that by building gas power plants to take up our baseline capacity needs. We need to have nuclear, and they need to face up to the music and realize this is the reality, what we're facing, and do something about it. But unfortunately,
my colleagues, I talk to them in the halls and around the place, and many of my Democratic colleagues say they're for nuclear power. Some quite openly and aggressively, but that's not in the legislation. And the President's not pushing it. And I met Dr. Chu. I know probably all of our members did before he was confirmed. And he's a nuclear physicist himself. I thought he was for it. But we see nothing that really moves us forward. So this is, it's not the language that's troubling me. It's a lack of action. And I just am really baffled by the fact that we are moving forward at this time of great national interest in low-cost clean energy, and we are walking away past the most logical option. What would be, which one thing, Mr. Campbell, I believe you testified there are 44 plants starting around the world under construction today?
I think it was David.
Or is that Mr. Blee? 44?
Or outside the United States.
There
outside
are 44,
the United States?
44 outside the United States, one here at home.
Well, the one at Watts Bar is basically a completion of a plant that was got at least initial licensing for earlier, and as the one at Browns Ferry.
I originally had 0, but then I talked to a very articulate guy from TVA, and then he reminded me that the senator from Tennessee was here, so I changed it to 1.
Well, I'll just note that they completed the one in Alabama first, on time, on budget. They projected initially it would pay for itself in 10 years. Then about the time it was completed, they projected it would pay for itself in 5 years. And I'm told now that with the price of energy have gone up and other things, they expect it to pay for its investment in 3 years. And this is a stunning thing. Now, this was a plant that cost less because it had already been built, but the economic potential for the ratepayers, the American public, is huge here. That's one of the things that worries me. I'll pass, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Thune?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am just constantly mystified by this issue because, as the senator from Alabama said, everybody professes to be for nuclear power. I mean, politicians, it doesn't matter where you go, we're for nuclear power. Until it comes time to actually draft policy that would incorporate nuclear power, then all of a sudden people are running for tall grass. I mean, it's you know, how can you have a renewable electricity standard without including the cleanest, greenest, most renewable form of energy that there is? And yet every time we have a debate about energy policy here in the Congress, you cannot find that provision or any inclusion of nuclear energy as part of a renewable electricity standard. Now, the Chairman and I have an ongoing dialogue about other forms of renewable energy, and everybody knows I come from wind and sun country, and we want all those included in there. But the fact of the matter is, you can't get anywhere close to 15 or 20 or 25% renewable unless you start bringing nuclear into the equation. It is. I mean, this is a form of insanity, and it's as a matter of public policy that we aren't including this. And so, obviously, that it's the same old thing that when it comes to politicians, you have to measure them by their actions, not their words. But I do have there is a question in here somewhere, and I wanted to ask, I guess, Mr. Campbell and others, if you care to comment, but there's been an argument made that the high construction costs may pose the most serious barrier to additional nuclear power production. I'm interested in knowing how the nuclear power industry is addressing that issue and how Congress or the Nuclear Regulatory Commission might help the industry adapt to some of those higher construction costs.
I'll just speak briefly about that because Alex will be more familiar with the facts, but clearly they're expensive, and the market, the cap or the capitalization of most of our utilities is not large enough to finance a $6 to $7 billion facility, or at least it's very difficult to do so without loan guarantees. There's the possibility that the Japanese, among others, may actually bring foreign loan guarantees to play, which could help us as well. But with that comes Japanese reactors, which are also American reactors, so it shouldn't be a problem there. But the biggest problem we have is, unlike Japan, where you have huge utilities with huge market capitalizations and a lot of money, our utilities don't have that kind of capital, and so they need some help. And we're not in the loan guarantee program. We're not asking for a subsidy. We're just simply asking for some loan protection, and which will probably be paid back, I suspect. Alex?
Senator, if I can say, the challenge for an entity looking to construct a nuclear plant is structural, in that the facility has very high capital costs compared to other sources of electricity. On the other hand, it has very low operating costs, and so once that facility comes online, the economics are really tremendous. As Senator Sessions said, a nuclear plant operates, the current fleet operates at 91% of capacity. So we start them up, we run them for 18 months, we shut them down for a 30-day or less refueling period, they come back online, they run at 100% for another 18 months. It's why for 7 years in a row now, the incremental cost of electricity generation off a nuclear plant is the lowest source of lowest cost electricity generation in the United States for 7 years running. But we really do have to struggle with this challenge of the high capital costs. The utilities, as Mr. Campbell referred to, have a market capitalization of between $9 and $35 billion. I didn't check the markets today, but that's in the general range of utilities. And so if they're looking to build nuclear plants, and remember that frequently they're trying to achieve economies of scale, so they're not just building one plant, but as they enter into the construction of the first plant, they will follow it on with a second plant built at the same site. So in many cases, they're looking at $12 to $15 billion investments, and you can understand the impact on that of a utility with a market capitalization of $9 to $35 billion. It's not like Electricité de France with a market capitalization of $200 billion in France. And so we need to find structural ways of addressing this challenge. One of the most important is when a state public utilities commission or a state legislature provides construction work in progress. What that enables is for the utility to recover from ratepayers some of the costs of construction as the construction is undertaken. It in effect allows them to begin paying off their debt faster. That's why in my prepared statement I said it's like making a larger down payment on your home. It reduces your monthly payments. It also reduces your interest charges over the life of the mortgage in the case of the house, or the life of the debt on the nuclear power plant. There are other ways of doing it. A loan guarantee provides the same assistance in reducing interest costs. But there is risk associated with financing these first mover nuclear plants as we demonstrate that they can be built on cost and on schedule. And there's a risk premium that's associated with that in the marketplace. The extent to which we can get a loan guarantee from DOE enables us to drive down those financing costs, and financing is a very large portion of the cost of the nuclear power plant. There are other issues that can help. It would help to have an investment tax credit for the construction of new nuclear plants. Similarly, in construction in tax space, it would help to have manufacturing tax credit for the components that are going to go into those plants, to reduce those components. Also, frankly, we talk about 44 nuclear plants built around the world. It concerns some of us that a large part of the nuclear manufacturing infrastructure has shifted offshore. The world is going to build new nuclear power plants. The real question for us is, where are those components going to come from? We'd like to see as much of that built in the United States as possible. And so the extent to which we can create incentives for that manufacturing to be here rather than overseas, we think reduces the uncertainty associated with that material being available, but also it's good for U.S. competitiveness and U.S. jobs. So there are issues like that that can address the structural challenges, but we have to recognize that nuclear plants are expensive. Once you have one, though, it's a tremendous opportunity.
If we end up with an electricity standard, and let's say, just for example, hypothetically, that nuclear were included in that, what kind of investment would we see? I mean, would it happen quickly? Do you see a lot of investment moving into, I know you've got to go through the process and all the permitting and everything else that goes with it. What would be your expectation in terms of the impact of those?
Senator, I have not seen an analysis of the economic impact of including nuclear in any one of the particular RES proposals. I'm sure that a lot of it would depend upon what the RES requirements were, whether it was 25%, 20%, or 15%. I'd be glad to get an analysis of that and get it back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Thune. I began the hearing by suggesting that if climate change is the inconvenient problem of the day, then nuclear power is the inconvenient answer. And Senator Thune's incredulity at how we could be even seriously thinking about dealing with climate change and clean air in America without including nuclear power at the forefront. As Senator McCain has said in the legislation he's offered, it's hard for any of us to understand. The figures we've heard today from the witnesses and from our own staff, I believe I'm right, was it 73 or 74% of the carbon-free, pollution-free electricity in the United States today comes from nuclear power. And I believe about 4% today comes from the sun, the wind, and the earth. And the remainder, which is 25%, probably comes from hydroelectric power. So if we were sitting here looking ahead 20 years and saying climate change is an urgent issue, and there are varying degrees of opinion about that in the Republican caucus, but if we were saying that, it's hard to imagine how you couldn't, why the most urgent solution would not be for the President to say to the Department of Energy and to the Nuclear Regulatory Agency, Commission, give me a plan to produce 100 nuclear power plants in 20 years. If we were to do that, we'd still barely be above 40% of our electricity being produced by nuclear energy in this country. That's 60 from something else. We might be able to get hydroelectric up from 6 to 8%. That's getting toward 50. We have high hopes for renewable electricity, wind and solar and biomass and other forms that might get us up to 6, 8, 10 more. But then we'd really be talking about a clean energy economy, but without it, without nuclear power, as one witness said, we'd get to 20 years from now, we'd have no nuclear power, or nearly, or not very much nuclear power, and we'd have zero chance of dealing with clean air, climate change, low-cost electricity, reliable electricity, all these things that we talk about. I thank the senators for their participation. I need to be on the Senate floor at 3:30, which is about the time we agreed to end the discussion, but I'm going to ask Senator McCain if he won't continue with the hearing until it's time to stop and ask any further questions. And I want to personally thank the witnesses for their comments. Senator McCain.
Mr. Campbell, have you seen the reprocessing facilities, either Japan or the French?
Yes, I've seen both.
And is there anything magic about it? Is there anything that we need to study new technology about?
No, all that you had there was a political will to get it done, and it was done. It's done very effectively, and it's put them in a unique position compared to the United States, which is a real problem. With we need to move into recycling. We need to close the fuel cycle. And I was surprised that when Secretary Blee testified that he didn't have a Plan B, which involved reprocessing.
And that he believed that we didn't have the technology.
Well, I think we do have the technology, and there's also opportunities to improve the technology. Yes, sir. Yeah, is that on? Sorry.
That's better.
Sorry. I was equally impressed when I visited Japan, and they've done it right, and they're moving forward. The French, of course, have been doing this for some time.
And they are developing even newer technology which reprocesses the reprocessed, as I understand. Maybe you could tell the committee a little bit about that.
Well, one of the things that we have to remember is that we use a very small percentage of the energy contained in the uranium when we use conventional thermal reactors. And when you move to faster reactors, we go through reprocessing, you use up a much higher percentage, maybe 90, 95, 96% of the energy in the uranium. So there is a real future in small, fast reactors, and even larger ones. And so now the Chinese, the Japanese are all starting to look at this technology, and it's something that we need to move forward on. We've done a lot of work in our national laboratories, but we haven't really done anything in the private sector, and the government needs to encourage that process as much as possible.
Mr. Blee, I'm sure you know that the only country that's making the Kyoto greenhouse gas emission goals is France. What effect do you think overall that we could have with significant investment, 100 plants in 20 years on the Kyoto goals, which we have never agreed to, but in comparison with other countries?
Well, I think that would bring us in alignment with the Kyoto goals. I believe that my statistics, and I think the senators are the same, would be at 35 to 40% of our sources would be coming from clean nuclear energy, and it really could be the workhorse to get us where we need to be with the Kyoto Protocol or the goals embodied in that treaty.
Well, all of you in your own way is helping inform public opinion. To me, this is almost a PR situation. I don't think Americans are aware of the potential associated with nuclear power. And I think they remember Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island and seeing movies that predict apocalyptic consequences of nuclear power. And so I thank you for your efforts, and we just have to make a much greater effort to convince this administration that the future energy needs, the independence, absolute compelling requirement for independence on foreign oil, which cost of which, as I mentioned earlier, is now, I believe, over $70 a barrel. And all of those lead us down the path to nuclear power, and why we are unable to convince the administration of that is especially people who are Nobel Prize winners, a lot smarter than I am, refuse to recognize the absolute criticality of it in meeting the future energy needs of this country. Senator Bunning?
I want to thank the panel for their input. We, on the Energy Committee, are so frustrated to the point of not being able to include a nuclear power section into a bill that will be out onto the Senate floor very shortly. We can't get from where we're at to where we want to go without the inclusion of nuclear power and the emissions reductions that we're looking to get to. I mean, we've got a cap and trade bill that's going to cost the American taxpayers, according to MIT, about $1.8 trillion. And we have the ability to use a lot less dollars if we put our energies into nuclear power to get to the same place, only quicker. And so the frustration of us sitting on the Energy Committee, and John is one, and Jeff is another, and myself, we don't understand why candidates say one thing and once they become elected, they say another thing. And John, Senator Thune, expressed it probably better than I. It seems crazy to us not to include nuclear power in a bill that we are going to try to reduce emissions and create more electricity from renewables or whatever, but we can't get there unless we use nuclear. So I thank you for your input today.
Mr. Flint, the nuclear industry support reprocessing and recycling of waste?
Yes, sir. We've suggested it needs to be part of an integrated strategy for dealing with used fuel.
Just to follow up on Senator McCain's questions, and maybe you're the one to ask, tell us about the nuclear fuel, when it's recycled, the difference in its toxicity and size as opposed to what it's like if you do not recycle it and you have to store it.
Senator, there are many different ways of addressing that question, but fundamentally, when uranium fuel goes through a reactor one time, a very small percent, less than 5% of that uranium is consumed as it produces energy. When the French recycle their used fuel, in an aqueous dissolution process, they dissolve it in acid.
You still have to pull that up a little closer.
They separate that used fuel into three elements, a plutonium, a uranium, and another actinide stream. They later recombine uranium and plutonium to create mixed oxide fuel, which goes back into the reactors. And they take the very small amount of the material, less than 4%, that comes off as true waste, and they vitrify it. It ends up in glass logs that they currently store in a building at La Hague. I've been in that building. I know a number of senators have been in that building. I think of it as about the size of 2 basketball courts, and it stores all the vitrified material from the French nuclear program. I've been shown a sample.
Now, how much, compared in volume, how much waste is it if you don't reprocess it, recycle it, and how much smaller is it if you do what you've got to store?
Senator, let me get you that math specifically, because there is material added as they vitrify those long-lived actinides, and there is waste produced in that process. So let me get you very exact tables on that, but let me give you an example also. I've been shown a sample of that vitrified material equivalent to a family's, the amount of waste that accumulates for a family during its lifetime, and it's about the size of the end of my thumb, if it gives you an idea of per family, the waste that they will accumulate over their lifetime.
Mr. Campbell, do you have any comment on that? You visited the French site. Do you know that?
Yes, I have. I do know. I think the number is clearly you reduce the waste down to in the small percentages, 5.
And isn't it a fact that the the toxicity of it is far less, so it's less dangerous, and its
Lifespan is shorter.
lifespan is far, far shorter.
In fact, if you move to reprocessing, then a place like Yucca Mountain could take on all the waste that you could probably conceivably produce versus having to have future depositories like Yucca Mountain if we continue to grow and build a nuclear power plant.
I think that's, a lot of people may not realize that. With regard to the plutonium, I'm told that under if you use one of the processes at least, it's not the kind of plutonium you make weapons with. Is that right, Mr. Flint?
Senator, the plutonium that comes out of used fuel is not exactly the same as the plutonium that is used in weapons. But most importantly, I think, and sometimes overlooked in this discussion, are the controls that are associated with that. So that facility is under IAEA safeguards. It is, simply put, it is not a proliferation threat. And so there needs to be two factors that are considered as we think about the proliferation threat from advanced fuel cycles. One is the inherent issues associated with the technology. At any point during the process, are materials separated? The second, though, and I think equally important, are the institutional controls that are associated with that material. My view, and I think the view of those experts who look at it, is that the recycling facilities in France, Japan, and Great Britain are not proliferation threats. I certainly would contend that if a reprocessing facility was built in the United States, it would not be a proliferation threat. We have weapons material. It's separate. It's stored in facilities at DOE facilities around the country. There's no conceivable way in which reprocessing facilities adequately safeguard under their international control represent a proliferation threat.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator McCain, and thank you for your leadership on this issue.
I thank the witnesses. It's been very helpful. Thank you. This hearing is over.